opening statement by the defense.
Good afternoon. I know it's been a long morning for you all, so I will try to do this as briefly as possible. This is not a whodunit case. We know who took action on March 19th to bring about the death of Ashley Smiley and the injuries to Heath Smiley. However, this is a why case. Why did it happen? Why did this exceptional child with no history of violence, who was loved by her friends, her teachers, her parents, who had a good home life, who loved her mother, why did she shoot her mom? Why did she shoot at her stepfather? The state would like you to believe the answer to those questions don't matter, but we know better than that. The answers to those questions is why we're here today, and it's what you're here to do. We believe the evidence will show that there were 3 victims on March 19th: Ashley Smiley, Heath Smiley, and Carly Gregg. That they were all 3 victims. We believe the evidence will show that Carly had been suffering from a mental illness, that Carly was not aware on March 19th that she had a mental illness. We believe the evidence will show that Carly's parents, who lived with her, were not aware that Carly was suffering from a mental illness. We believe the evidence will show that Carly's close friends, who saw her at school every day, were not aware that Carly was suffering from a mental illness, because it's hard to look at a person and understand that they have a mental illness. It's hard to look at a person and know that they have a mental illness. That's why it's often referred to as the invisible disease. A person can exhibit symptoms of a mental illness without people necessarily knowing that they have one, or other people necessarily knowing that's what another person has. While the events on March 19th were tragic, the events on March 19th were not intentional. The evidence will show, and the testimony will show, that Carly Gregg loved her mother. That Carly Gregg and her mother had a loving, close relationship. Carly Gregg's mom loved her. In fact, her life revolved around Carly, as parents' lives often do revolve around their children. Carly very much wanted to please her mother. Carly was an exceptional student, made a 30 on the ACT when she was 13 years old. She was the apple of her mother and her stepfather's eye. And you will understand by the conclusion of this hearing why Carly's stepfather is still supporting her and standing behind her. Because he knows on March 19th, there were 3 victims: Ashley, Heath, and Carly. The state will ask you to take your good judgment, to take your common sense, and to put it in a bucket, to put the lid on the bucket, and to toss the bucket out of this courtroom. We implore you not to do that, to retain your common sense, to retain your good judgment, and to make sure that you are listening to the evidence as it's presented, because it doesn't matter how many witnesses the state puts on, their story is filled with inconsistencies because they're not telling the whole story. The evidence will not show that Carly was ever deemed dangerous by anyone. The evidence will not show that Carly ever had any desire to hurt her mother. The evidence will not show that Carly ever had any desire to hurt any person. The evidence will not show that Carly invited people over to her house to view her mom's body. What it will show is that on March 19th, a hysterical Carly called her closest friends, begging them for help, begging them to help her. The evidence will show that Carly did not recognize Heath Smiley when he got home that day. You'll hear that from him himself. The evidence will show that Carly was so terrified when Heath Smiley got home on March 19th that even after Carly left the house, Heath walked around the house with the handgun in his hand looking for an intruder because he was convinced by Carly, by how she appeared, by how she acted, by what she did that day, by the child he had known for years that he was seeing on that day, that she was terrified, something horrible would happen, and that there must have been someone else in that house to cause that kind of terror in Carly. What the evidence will not show is that Carly had a drug problem. What the evidence will not show is that Carly and her mother had any argument on March 19th. What the evidence will not show is that Carly had any desire to hurt her stepfather. What the evidence will not show is that Ashley Smiley was angry when she left school that day, or that Ashley Smiley was upset with Carly when she left school that day, or that after they got home on March 19th, Ashley and Carly engaged in an argument. The evidence will not show that Ashley Smiley found anything in Carly's bedroom that would have caused an argument. The evidence will not show that Carly intended to hurt anyone. The evidence will not show that Carly has not grieved her mother's loss. The evidence will not show that law enforcement did their due diligence in investigating this matter. The evidence will not show that Carly was abusing or misusing prescription medication. The evidence will not show that Carly had a secret life, but rather was just a teenager who had a life that her parents didn't know everything about. That's called having a teenager and being a parent. The evidence will not show that Carly had ever tried to harm another person, had ever had a desire to hurt another person. The evidence will not show that Carly is a monster, that Carly was a difficult child, a troubled child, or a deranged child. The evidence will not show that Carly Gregg does not deserve you to return a verdict of not guilty. Now, the evidence will show that Carly had a family history of mental illness. In fact, it was well documented. The evidence will show that Carly was concerned that something was wrong with her. She wrote journal entries about it. The evidence will show that Carly was afraid she had the same mental illness that her father had. The evidence will show that Carly's mother had worried for years about Carly having the same mental illness that her father had. The evidence will show that Carly was very emotionally tied into her mother's emotions, and that Carly never wanted her mother to worry about her. The evidence will show that Carly was scared of how her mother would react to the knowledge that if Carly had the same mental illness that her father had. That doesn't sound like a child that doesn't love her mom. And that doesn't sound like a child who has any intention of hurting her mother. The state would like you to believe that it's normal for a child to go home from school one day with their mother, who they love, and shoot her, but nothing's wrong. It was just marijuana. Or because she was on social media and her mom didn't want her on social media. But again, we ask you to retain your common sense and to retain your good judgment, because we know that just doesn't make sense. And at the end of this trial, if the state's case still leaves you feeling like their version of events just doesn't make sense, then you must return a verdict of not guilty.
State may call its first witness.
State calls Kevin Collins, Your Honor. Your Honor, Mr. Lewis approaching